All right, everybody. I will note, so usually when I do these, slightly
Keep
more
an eye on
extensive
the volume of how light
film
off.
experience. This one's
Down.
going to be a little shorter because I know this is a fan favorite. And so we're going to have a little extra time for
Nice.
folks to be talking at the end and sharing their thoughts on Moonstruck. Because frankly, I think we have some folks on the call tonight that have seen it far more than I have, far more times. I'm really looking forward to hearing some thoughts from you when we're finished. But
Where's this
Moonstruck
camera
is
shot?
directed by John Patrick Shanley. He actually just came out with a new film. The name's escaping me, but he's been working in the field for a long time. Also a playwright. He did a great film called Doubt, starring Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman, I think, in 2008. So he's kind of like been working throughout the decades on various things. Many films involving especially kind of life in complicated urban settings. A Doubt about Irish Catholic priest, a nun in a Catholic school, and in Moonstruck, the Italian Catholic community in New York City. Moonstruck opens with this beautiful credit sequence that, of course, throughout the film features the Twin Towers and the moon. As my partner in crime, Anna Reiff, has noted, the moon's almost like a character throughout this film. And so we kind of get these beautiful opening vignettes as the film begins. And much like even the opening 400 Blows, we have that kind of iconic building in 400 Blows, the Eiffel Tower in the opening scene. Here the Twin Towers. And so we get our performers. I didn't grab a screenshot of course, Cher's name, but Cher is the main characters we'll talk about here. I did want to make sure we got a shot of Denny Aiello, who's a major figure in 90s and 80s films, especially sort of depicting Italian American communities. So a big figure there. It was a great get for this film. And also behind his name, we see the Metropolitan Opera. It's a great opening sequence, partly for sort of establishing the setting of the film, but also we see an opera being created and sort of set up, and sort of the behind the scenes element of that, a truck showing up, the signs being put, the equipment, which is very Shanley. He loves to sort of think through the process, the gritty process of what happens in the back alleys of cities. So the film is about, though, Cher's character, who, as we'll see, is a hardworking young woman who's living at home. She's going to potentially marry Danny Aiello's character. He goes home to Sicily to take care of his mother, who may or may not be passing. And then she, as we'll see, falls for a different person. And we'll talk about that complicated plot in a second. But Cher does a really fantastic job, I think, in this film. I haven't seen a lot of films with Cher in them, but sort of really kind of walking a line. So this is, as you can see from the shot, she's leaving Cinderella Beauty Shop. This is towards the end of the film. We'll see she looks different earlier. This is definitely a film that kind of that develops the tropes and the mythology of the Cinderella story, but also is really grounded in a particular fabric of, again, Italian American culture in the 1980s that Shanley's kind of really paying close attention to. And she's able to do both. She's able to sort of be that lived in character for that cultural aspect Shanley is clearly quite interested in, but also some of the more mythological kind of elements that he's always enjoyed too, parable kind of stuff. And so she does a really nice job kind of balancing both. A tip of the hat to that performance style. And again, sort of another indication of the Cinderella story when she donned these bright red shoes, or maybe even Wizard of Oz. I don't know what he was thinking with that. But we see, early on in the film, she obviously looks different in the left-hand portion of the shot. She's sort of, she's an accountant for various places, like a mortuary here, and a flower shop, and also a grocery store. And this gives us a sense of the kind of character she is. That's very important. But also what I think is important about these ways that she's hopping through these businesses, it's again Shanley kind of giving us a sense of all these different kind of working class establishments. Maybe middle class here, obviously the nice suit for the mortuary, but certainly her role within them. And we also get a sense of all these different locations that are inextricably linked to the community. I think what's really great about Moonstruck, the story is, of course, wonderful and funny, and it's a nice romance, but Shanley's really kind of showing us the texture of what New York City is like at this time. I was also on my recent view, there's lots of moments where we see her in a mirror. I hadn't really been able to think through, so I got swept up. What can I say? I got swept up in the story and the romance and Nick Cage, as we'll see. But there's definitely something happening where likely sort of who she has to be and who she wants to be is kind of happening. We have this visual motif of her with mirrors. And there she is again with the mirror. And you know, this is a film that has that romantic aspect, sometimes also in the small things, from a rose to a small gesture, as we'll see. It does sort of move from what Cher doing her life with her family and work to becoming this kind of torrid love affair where she's supposed to be marrying Danny Aiello, but she meets up with his brother, played by Nick Cage, and they have this torrid love affair. And of course, it turns into the romance that, if you've seen Moonstruck, is what it's known for. Nick Cage, as I'll mention, coming up is kind of an odd fit to me, but obviously is sort of part of the mythology, these bigger than life characters the film's filled with. Towards the end, we get some of these iconic, sophisticated moments where they're going to the opera. And of course, we can see it's not just Cher who sort of transforms her visual sense, but also Nick Cage. And what I think is interesting is that we start in these kind of really rugged, very rugged in the case of when we first see Nick Cage, we'll see settings, but we get to sort of the pinnacle of sophistication of New York City towards the end with the opera and the suits and all of that. And sort of a truly iconic thing, you know, them outside with, you know, they meet for the first time, they see each other in the resplendent glory. We have the fountain behind them. So we kind of have this arc that the film's following, sort of both the city evolves in our thinking on it, as well as the characters. So one way to also think about Shanley's camera in this film is not just kind of thinking about the characters. He's very good at capturing the performance. We've got these three great performers, especially Cher, Nick Cage, and Danny Aiello in his way. But his sense of lighting and his sense of framing, I think, is very good. So obviously, at times, he's going to be capturing elements in New York City, but at times he's also using the mise-en-scène, the design of the shot, to capture a sense of the character. So, you know, put the setting as character aside, let's just think about the human characters. When we first meet Nick Cage, I think this is probably the best example of it in the film, because at first it's kind of mysterious who he is, but we sort of see this, he's working at a bakery in the basement, the clutter, the grimness, and Shanley, to me, is a director who knows how to sort of capture characters both through dialogue and performance, but also what's around him. And he does a great job with that, first depicting Nick Cage. Nick Cage, though, certainly does take this to some extremes. He's a very volatile and powerful performer in many of his films, but I think it does fit here. After Moonstruck and into the 21st century, Nick Cage becomes kind of a strange, he has sort of an interesting arc to his performance. He likes taking on strange characters, but I think here, you know, maybe because Shanley knows how to modulate things, because he's such a good director and writer, he's able to kind of channel that energy into some interesting directions. Of course, he's got this wooden hand. He had an injury younger. This is why he has a break with his brother for the convoluted plot. But I think, though, you know, so Nick Cage does have those big roles. There are big moments in the film, but it also is a film about talking and about those small moments. And we see here just pushing the Nick Cage scenes a little bit further, but developing this idea. You know, this is early on in the relationship. She's trying to kind of figure out who the brother of my potential husband will be. Shanley does a great job kind of just filming those sequences as much as the really big ones, as much as the sort of artistically distinctive sequences like that. Small touches also help us develop a sense of character, whether it's, you know, Nick Cage at first seems like a very aggressive character, but he has this great love of opera too, and these close-ups on the record and also the cassette tapes, and also right above here are these music opera posters, you know, gives us a different sense of dimension of the character. I would say with Nick Cage, especially his character, we get more objects that help us understand that, whereas with Cher, it's more in the relationships with her family, as we'll see. And just to pull back the camera, this is another indication of this, sort of Shanley using, much like with the bakery, this is later in the film, we've learned about him, we know he's got more dimensions than sort of this gruff exterior, and we can see here sort of the Catholic calendar, this bird cage, perhaps symbolic of his entrapment in society and how people perceive him, but also a nice deep shot. This character gets a lot of those kind of sequences. I just want to do a quick note. I'm absolutely enamored, as some of you know, with sort of French New Wave techniques. And we get a couple notes of this. There's an early sequence where Cher is driving her potential husband, played by Danny Aiello, out to the airport. And we get this awesome shot where they're driving through the tunnel, obviously shot right on location. So the camera's right in the car. I'm just sort of a sucker for that stuff. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, we gotta get some shots of that. The film is totally shot on location, but we can see that Shanley, as I'm about to show you, also has some very evocative lighting that's not naturalistic like we have in this sequence. So most of the film is a little bit more evocative, but I like that scene. To wit, we have here's Cher's father, but throughout the film, Shanley is really using this dramatic lighting, I think, to sort of increase the drama of the performances. Maybe the performances are a bit broad, are a bit big. That's why, of course, we like the film. But the lighting is often used to enhance that, as we see early on when Cher's telling her father, I'm going to marry Danny Aiello's character. He's like, what are you doing that? You've already been married. Why are you going to get married again? Here we have Danny Aiello back in Sicily, caring for his mom who's ailing in the back, likely kind of playing up a bit fancifully, or maybe not, the setting here, but again, that kind of dramatic lighting. It's a very intense sequence that is a bit at odds with, especially Cher sequences, which are often softer lit. And just to sort of complete the trio, this is, first of all, lots of telephone usage in this film. But also the first time we see Nick Cage, it is also very dramatically lit. He's facing away from us too, and increases the mystery of who he is. But we have almost a silhouette kind of figure here, sort of German expressionistic touch. We have throughout the film, though, lots of sequences of Cher also interacting with her parents, and this is another one where we do enhance the lighting a little bit. Here's another mirror shot. And so I want to just toss that in to sort of complete the sense that she's not excluded from these kind of scenes, but generally she's more sort of a softer hue. I really enjoy, just to pull back to the sense of the setting, though, having gone through lighting and talked about some of the broader points of the film. Restaurants are a huge part of this film, and with the restaurants come these wonderful neon signs. And so you get a real visual pop, but you also get a sense of sort of the specific look of New York City and these neighborhoods at the time. And so sometimes they're wide shots, sometimes they're close up, and it kind of just gives a nice variety to the sequence. Sort of playing off that, though, right? So the neon would be really there. That's all part of the setting's appeal. Beyond the main characters, here's Danny Aiello, here's Cher, of course. This is the scene where he proposes to her in a restaurant. Shanley uses a lot of like background characters and kind of lurid or sort of fanciful ways that don't seem realistic, that seem fantastical. So in the sequence, he's proposing, and some people would be looking over, but they probably wouldn't all be like staring and getting involved in the moment. And then the whole restaurant is watching. And so I think, Shanley's being playful with some of the background characters. And here the waiters, they're clapping and really having a great, even this guy is loving it. This continues beyond that sequence. There's a moment where Cher goes to the airport, and this woman who's sort of fancifully evocative of the old country, so to speak, saying, I put a curse on the woman that's getting on that plane. And Cher says, I don't believe in curses. She's very practical and very modern. But why are we interacting with this character? It's just another Shanley touch to sort of increase the fanciful quality. Along with that, we have, some great on-location sequences like here to kind of embellish a sense of the city, just to develop that. We finish it up here at the end of the, written by John Patrick Shanley, my mistake, and Norman Jewison. But even some of the small details, like what we see here with, the cafe, the espresso, and the cake, right? To Jewison and Shanley's script, nothing is going to be too small because the culture is sort of interwoven throughout the film. But what I think is really special and appealing to me, certainly, right, the craft of the film is terrific. The characters are great. The love story is wonderful, but we get to interact with also other relationships. This is a film that is about relationships as much as about love, so the ups and the downs. And obviously, there's some things that happen between her mom and dad, her dad's infidelity, and her mom sort of wrestling with that. But I love how we have these two grocers that we get to interact with, and the relationship that they have. We see here Cher's getting a bottle of wine or something. We see kind of an extended sequence, almost like a mini play of a husband and wife kind of first arguing and then loving each other. Even here, Cher's mom interacts with a gentleman who ends up being a major player in Frasier. But anyways, just these chance encounters. Maybe it's a relationship that's going on for a long time. Perhaps it's a relationship that just, got started. Or what it really comes down to, this is one of the final shots of the film, is family, the way that family can kind of come together in unexpected ways, right? At the beginning of the film, Cher is supposed to get to marry Danny Aiello, but by the end, Nick Cage proposes to Cher. So it's an interesting sort of alignment here anyways. But I think that's an interesting way to kind of express community, not just in the family dynamic, which is core to the film, but the different arrangements that occur. This is also her grandfather, I want to say, sort of this figure who goes throughout the film. He's sort of in the background. Sometimes he has his dogs with him. In this sequence, he's with some friends at a funeral or at the graveyard, at least. Here we see the grandfather putting some plates down for a different kind of community of all these puppies and dogs that are kind of scrambling to eat a meatball. And we'll see towards the end also his way to sort of tie together some of the visual motifs. My last point probably be about light. So, for a film called Moonstruck, could be called Moonlight. Light is evocatively used. Texture of light. Here we have Cher at a confession. She's at a Catholic church confessional, and we see the light kind of coming through the screen. But likely the scene that stands out to most folks is when we see, this montage or an extended intercut sequence where a bunch of people are being moonlight dappled, and then a bunch of folks kind of look out the window to see the moon. And the way that the moonlight interacts with drapery and windows, we see her mom looking out. And so these are all in different locations, right? So everyone's looking at the same moon, but in different locations in this sequence. She looks out, and a friend or an uncle sort of is evocatively lit, and his wife says, "Boy, you sure look nice in the moonlight." We even have a sequence later on in the opera. I think the zoom camera here is blocking. There is a moon behind this image, and so the way that the moon is sort of even put into art within the art of Moonstruck. But just to pull back to the sequence, right? This is a moment they've just sort of consummated their love, but sort of they're coming together here, looking at the moon. The way that sort of that entity, again, maybe a character in its own right in the film, brings so many folks together. Is it going to be the city? Is it going to be the culture? Is it going to be family? Is it going to be something even beyond us? Is, I think, something that's neat and interesting about this sequence that is a major focus of the film. Of course, this moment here where, we saw in the first opening credits, but we also see here the grandfather with the dogs, but also, yes, the moon hovering over the city. That is not just the background of the film, but I think interwoven in the texture of the film. Folks, next, we're going to talk about Moonstruck next month, though. We are definitely, I know we mentioned this for fans of the program dating back to October. I know we mentioned talking about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but we are going to do it next month. We already did Ang Lee's film, Life of Pi. We talked about Ang Lee's kind of big picture thinking. So this time I'm going to be talking more about the wuxia genre of Chinese films. We're going to talk about Ang Lee for sure and his style. It evolves with this film, but we'll also talk about wuxia filmmaking, sort of what are the elements of that really famous driving force in Chinese film for many decades. Gets a nice update in 2000s, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but we're going to dig into that. Talk about a couple other examples too. Hope you'll be there for that. But for now, that's my thinking on Moonstruck. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this film?
Yes, and feel free to hop back on your cameras and unmute yourselves, folks, if you would like to. No, not obligated to, but if you can join us, that's wonderful. Thank you, Mike. That was great. a movie that, it's one of those movies that's always kind of been in the background of my awareness from childhood. It was just one of those movies that was kind of on HBO, and we might have a VHS copy of it we popped in every once in a while. But getting to look at it with a critical eye is really illuminating, perhaps with Moonlight.
Absolutely. And I don't want to be downplaying. I'm sure some folks will see this and be like, you didn't talk enough about Cher. I mean, I feel like if we see the film, we understand kind of those major elements. I mean, what can I say about Cher and Nick Cage beyond, they're such great performers, but I was hoping to bring a little something more to it, because I think on my second or third viewing here, there were a lot of films at this time, mid 80s to early 90s, that were set in that naturalistic New York landscape. I'm thinking King of Comedy by Scorsese. But I think there's something more happening with this film, partly from Shanley's script and also the great performers, that we do get a sense of the culture and the setting more than just like a plot. I'm also thinking Gilda or Gloria by John Cassavetes. I mean, those are kind of like plot-driven things, and we really get to relish the city. So hopefully you got a sense of that through this, through the images that I put together here.
Mike,
Also, oh, go ahead, Dad.
the reason I really liked it is it reminded me of my childhood. There was a lot of scenes and a lot of personalities and stuff that I saw in my relatives from up until I was around 10 years old. And a lot of the, like even inside their homes reminded me of my grandmother's house and things like that, that really hit home. But there was one point where, if you notice, Nick Cage with his hand,
Yep.
where just before, after the opera, where they're walking and they find themselves in front of his house, and he talks about life, what is life, and all this, where they finally realize that they belong together. It's the first time in the movie that he offers and uses his bad hand, where he reaches it out to her, and she grabs it, like, okay, it's okay now. I'm all right with this, And that's the one part that got me. But right at the end too, where it shows the whole family together celebrating around the kitchen table, really hit home with me.
I bet. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I could see that.
Great observation about the hand. Yeah, that's a.
I guess, for some of my Chinese friends, they say that you should watch like the Joy Luck Club if you want to understand more Chinese culture. And I think that it's the case with like Italian American culture, that if you want to understand that, everyone automatically tells you to watch like Moonstruck. But also I didn't think of the moon playing a part in and of itself. It was actually Ebert said that. And I know I stole it, but he also said that the moon seems to want to intervene and push people forward. And it's like a happy intervention, trying to bring people together. So I thought that was really interesting.
Wow. That's a first reference we've had in any of these to like an outside source. So I really appreciate that.
Got to name drop Ebert every now and then.
That's right.
That's great.
That's right.
Our first Ebert reference. Thank you. But great point. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that observation. I was totally ready to give you full credit for that, Anna. The moon.
Oh, I shouldn't have said anything.
It is it's a lovely image, and I'm almost reminded of Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman, Smart as a Summer Night.
Okay.
It's almost an inverse situation where the sun almost, or the sun that refuses to set, plays the role of sort of the peeping, almost sprightly figure that's sort of like observing and maybe prodding the action along. So we've got the sunshine doing it in Arctic Circle. We've got New York City with its moonlight. It's
interesting. Also, did Bergman ever do a love story, or did he only do like very grim anti-love stories?
Miles of a Summer Night is somewhat of a love story, yes.
Okay. All right. I'll have to see it. Great. Any other thoughts on Moonstruck? We want to put on the table.
I think the moon is a ploy, well, not a ploy,
There we go.
as a way of looking at something that is in the background all the time, but it's going to tie everything together, because like they say at the end of the movie, you say everyone is looking at it. So their stories are all in an Italian family way, scattered and moving around. And then all of a sudden they see the moon, and they are all one people. And they may have all their different troubles, and they come to conclusion one way or another, but the moon seems to bring them all together at the end. And I think that's basically what it is. They're all struck by it. And they stop, thinking about what's going on. And I mean, the gentleman is looking out the window, and his wife says, "You look very good there." And so it all sort of comes together at the end. But the Nicolas Cage figure, he obviously isn't a rough and tumble guy. He's got a beautiful interior there, and he loves opera, but that's just his job. And so a lot of us just have our jobs, but then we are actually different people. And I guess for Cher, it's the same thing. She's working all the time, and then all of a sudden her mother says, "You got to snap out of this. You got to get going with your life." So she goes to the Cinderella, and she turns into a Cinderella. And so she becomes something beyond just the workaday world. So, and then all of a sudden they're all moonstruck. So I think it was a wonderful, sweet movie.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, yeah.
I think I was
Also,
struck.
if you think of it in another way, in a more comedic way, it's like the big fat Greek wedding.
Mhm.
Same idea, only it's a more comical thing. And then at the end, the two lovers become family with the daughter, and everything is resolved. But it's sort of a playing through all the different problems and coming to a solution at the end. But that's hilarious. This one is just very sweet.
Mhm.
I like Moonstruck a lot.
Yeah.
So, okay, Diane. Sorry, I
Sorry,
interrupted.
that's okay. I was struck at the beginning at how many references to death there were.
Oh,
She works for the mortician. The older gentlemen are attending some kind of funeral.
Right.
They talk about her first husband's death.
Yeah.
The mother's talking about death. And then someplace along the line, why is the father having the affair? The reason seems to be sort of evading death. So then there's the love. So I thought that was a kind of a subtle but very interesting progression toward the kind of cure. Live life when you've got it, because we all do die.
Yeah, beautifully said, Diane. That I would think that's from Ebert too, but I think that's all you, and that's fantastic. Thank you.
All that literature came in for good.
Yeah,
some good.
Very good. I didn't really think about that transition, that pivot point. That pivot point may even be the moon sequence, right? Sort of right in the middle of the film, where we move away from the death sequences. But that's a great observation. Yeah.
Along those lines, I don't know if anybody paid attention to this. Is there any progression in the moon, like fade? Do you see the moon waxing and waning, or is it pretty much always a full moon?
No, it's always that full moon. There's no sort of ghoulish Halloween crescent moon. There's just
yes.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because in the cycles of the moon,
Sure.
is in terms of ancient belief systems, the new moon and the waning moon, the moon decreasing, is symbolic of death, and the full moon is the fullness of life. So that makes sense that as the moon shines down on these people and brings them together in their various familial and romantic bonds, that's sort of the power of life striking them in a way. So that might tie it all together.
cool.
It didn't wax and wane, though. It just sort of stayed
Just always life. Yeah.
almost. But I think it was just hovering in the background, waiting for them. Come
Yeah.
on, get together here. Resolve, resolve, and then here I am.
Yes.
I don't know. That's just my.
Yeah.
Mike, I wonder, could you show that last slide of the cityscape with the moon
Yeah.
hovering over
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, so,
There's
Uh,
that last one there.
dog. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what it is, but there's something about the filmmaking or the photography or something of the 1980s in my mind where you get that cityscape where you can't see the buildings, you just see the light and everything is stark black with the pinpoints of light on it. That's so evocative of a certain like 1980s lovely vibe to me. I don't know. It's always been that's just such a perfect representation of it. You don't see that so much. I don't think anymore nowadays. The filming techniques sort of do a better job, quote unquote, of maybe having gradations of color even in the darkness, and you can kind of see the buildings and whatnot. And that's nice too. But this sort of stark light on black has always been very
Another odd thing about
striking
that.
to me. So it's nice to see that.
The moon is always too big. I mean, if you're actually out there, the
It's a
moon
blue moon.
is not that big. If you hold up a coin to it in the night sky, it's, you know, this is a silver dollar or something. It's as though this is a telephoto shot, and then the moon is big as you're looking at it. But so that from that point of view, it's an unnatural moon. The moon's come closer to the Earth. It's coming and spying on us, so to speak. It's sort of reaching into us a bit, because when you look at a moon the only time you see a moon that looks big is right at sunrise, at moonrise, if you're lucky, or at moonset. That's when it looks big because it's close to things that give it scale, and thus it looks bigger. It may actually be bigger because of the atmosphere. It may enlarge it, but when it's up in the night sky, it's not that big. It's nice and bright and all that, but it's not that big. So there's a manipulation of the moon character, if you will, as coming down to Earth as if it's come down to look at us, and oh well, that's enough. Then it'll go back up to the sky or something.
Well-
And also, and you're so right about that. And also, Alex, your point about the New York City skyline is it does look like it's something out of a play or like the backside of an opera.
Yeah. Oh yes.
At that time too.
And the one part about the grandfather, really, I'm going back to the Italian family again. It leads to the grandparents are really although he had a somewhat of a comic role in the movie, you notice whenever he spoke or asked, like at the end where he told his son, "You're going to pay for the wedding," there was no arguing with it. It was like he is the centerpiece. He may not, he's old, frail and all this, but they still listen to his wisdom. And almost like at the end of the movie where Alex is showing at the thing where he's looking up at the moon, it's almost like, yes, I'm still there. He's still the center point of the family, keeping it together.
That's a great observation, but we can't also forget that in the scene I showed you where he's feeding the dogs the meatball, then Cher's mom says, "If you do that again, I'll kill you," and he stopped. So really, she's the one with the power, but yes, he gets to sort of have
definitely too.
Yeah, we can't cross the mom that makes the meatballs. But thanks everybody. I really appreciate these wonderful insights. This has been a great discussion here. Alex, thanks for putting this on.
Yes,
February.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
That? Yeah, absolutely. And February is a quick month, everybody. So do take a look on Facebook for the next posting. Alex, you always do a good job at that. And as always, this film, Crouching Tiger, you can see it for free on imdb.com as well as in other places. But you'll be able to see that for free if you'd like to prepare for next week's discussion.
Next month.
Next month. They seem to come very fast, Alex.
It does come fast. But, thank you very much, Mike. Very, as always, an excellent discussion. And thank you to everybody who joined us. It was good to see familiar faces and some new folks as well, and to hear those voices. So thank you all, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
Great.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Thank
Thank you. Wonderful story. Love it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.